Welcome to Wired Up Retro, episode 21. It's really good to see you out there. And of course, today's episode is going to have a connection to the Atari games and systems of the 80s. But for right now, I'm going to mention that I have a new controller discovery to present that has to do with a more recent game system, the Gamecube from 2001. What I'll be showing you how to do has never been done before, and that is to connect adapters for the purpose of using Nintendo 64 controllers on a Nintendo Gamecube. Now, to most, this might seem like a step backwards, and I'm certainly in agreement that the Nintendo 64 controller is more cumbersome and unwieldy than the Gamecube controller happens to be. But there are some of you out there, you know who you are, who became very in tune with your Nintendo 64 controller back in the days of Super Mario World, Pilotwings 64, and Super Smash Brothers. It's nostalgia that can drive you to want to use your long-lost controller once again. And I want to help you to accomplish that. Now, there's also another reason why you'd want to use a Nintendo controller on a GameCube, and that has a little something to do with playing a specific GameCube game with tilt motion controls. Now, if you're confused, don't worry. It will all make sense in just a few minutes. Now, for now, let's take a step back in time and start at the beginning. And back in 1977, two very cool things happened. Atari released their first cartridge-based video game console. And the second thing is that Star Wars, the hit movie, hit the theaters. But the two, Star Wars and video games, didn't end up coming together for actually quite some time. In 1983, it hit the arcades. That's 6 years later. And the name of that game was Star Wars the Arcade Game. And of course, about 12 months or 6 months earlier than that, there was a couple of Atari 2600 Star Wars related games, one called Jedi Arena and one called The Empire Strikes Back, which were, pretty well good hits on the Atari system. But back then, what we really wanted was an X-Wing and a TIE Fighter space combat type experience. And wow, in the arcade, Atari really delivered in 1983. They, in my opinion, knocked it out of the park with an amazing work of 3D vector graphics and a truly inspired arcade soundtrack. The gameplay, it was spot on, it required intense focus, and it was even made better thanks to its nicely designed flight yoke. The sit-down cabinet really made you feel like you were in the ship's cockpit right in the middle of the Death Star battle. Console gamers were soon getting to play the game also in their homes. My personal first experience at home playing Star Wars the Arcade Game was on the Atari 2600. It plays pretty well and it looks better than what you might be expecting, but playing the game with the humble little Atari joystick leaves you feeling a little empty. First off, it's not an analog flight controller, but offers only digital controls. And that means the cursor always moves around at one particular speed, unlike what you would get with a flight yoke that's analog. Secondly, it's a joystick, and not a flight yoke that you can grab with two hands. And that kind of takes the Star Wars the Arcade Game experience to a galaxy a little bit further away. So yeah, in today's episode, I really want to make something, and I want it to be a flight yoke. A flight yoke for the Atari 2600 first and foremost, and eventually we're going to get to the GameCube. But let's start from the beginning. Yeah, definitely. This is a joystick that was made for the Atari 2600. It's called Lay Stick, and Lay Stick actually has little internal motion sensors, and it's actually a mercury-based motion sensing device. So there's mercury inside there. So anyway, you tilt it this way to go up, that way to go down, and then you can go left and right. Now, you wouldn't want to really play Star Wars the Arcade Game on the 2600 with this. Or maybe you would. What I did was I managed to get this. This is something I got a while back. It's for an iPhone. One of the older version iPhones fit in the Appfinity steering wheel. These days, since people upgrade their phones, you find these things at thrift stores. You can find it on Amazon. They're not a hot commodity anymore, but they are very well made, and it's a nice grippy material they made it out of. It's pretty snazzy looking, shiny. Anyway, if you've got this little compartment for the phone, I thought, well, why don't we take the lace stick and put it on one side and strap it with, let's say, a Velcro strap, okay? And do the same. I actually have one other kind of joystick. This could potentially be a Genesis or Atari 2600 motion sensor joystick, okay? And so since Genesis controllers will work on an Atari 2600, this will work as well on Star Wars the arcade game. And again, strapping that on there. I'm going to put those straps on. I'll come back, I'll show you what this looks like when they're all strapped in, and maybe we'll show you a little bit of gameplay footage of Star Wars the arcade game on the 2600. Now, before I show you a little bit of the gameplay of Star Wars the arcade game, I am just showing you how it looks with the straps in place, and you can tell that you can get the proper action. You know, in the arcade for Star Wars the arcade game, you had basically this sort of steering yoke type device where pulling it up would bring the cursor up, pushing it down this way brings it down, and then left and right. But it was more of an analog controller. By the way, I didn't plug in the Genesis controller. I plugged in the lace stick, which is the Atari 2600 Mercury stick, all right? Before I start the game, let me show you something here. Now, you know, you could also use the trigger command, which is kind of like a flight yoke, well, flight stick for a joystick. And I don't have this plugged in, but you know, you get the idea. It would probably work, and you just have to hold it with the one hand. Probably work pretty nicely for this game. Also, I have one of my original Heavy Sixer joysticks. The downside is, you know, it's very much not an exciting joystick to play this game with, whereas this, on the other hand, might be a little more exciting because it's more like the arcade. But I'm just letting you know, this probably would be the most accurate way to play the game, actually. And it's, you know, makes sense. Everybody has one of these. Now, another thing I want to mention here is I have a controller for the Genesis. Again, these will work on the Atari 2600. This is a quick shot flight yoke. The neat thing about this is that, you know, you can go left and right, and then pushing it in brings the cursor down, and pulling it out will bring the cursor up. And I've tried playing the game with it. This is not a good way to control the game, unfortunately. I tried it, and I gave it a good shot. It's just not very accurate, and it leaves a lot to be desired. The left and right was okay, but pulling it in and pushing in and pulling out was very, very challenging to play the game with those controls. All right, so I'll go ahead and get this game going here. Okay, stand in front of it here so you can see me play. Got him. Onto the Death Star. There. You can also use your thumb. Get over there. Get over there. Up, down, up, down, down, up, and down. Uh-oh. Couldn't quite make it to the end. So now I want to show you my Appfinity wheel design for the Atari 5200. As you can see, I have a PlayStation controller in there. I used an adapter called the PC 15 pin to Atari 5200 adapter, and plugged into that an adapter called the Smart Joy emulator adapter, and that is a PC 15 pin a PlayStation controller gets plugged into that, or PlayStation 2 as it is with this. This is a tilt sense controller, and as you can see, I'm able to control my cursor in the Atari 5200 Star Wars the arcade game with this in tilt sense mode. So anyway, I want to show you how I mounted this in the Appfinity wheel. If I turn it around, you will see here that I made a few modifications. I drilled a hole with a drill and put this screw in there. That's a 10 by 24, 1¼ inch round top machine screw. And that little piece of rubber that's right up against the controller is called a well nut. And a well nut actually has metal on the inside that you just feed your screw into. And not only did I use that above, but as you can see, I also used it below. And I didn't have to drill holes in this part of the Appfinity wheel. There are already little grooves in there. So, and again, I've got well nuts right up against the controller. So it's basically a rubber coated surface that's not damaging the controller. So let's go ahead and play the 5200 version of Star Wars the arcade game with the Appfinity wheel, and we'll get it going here. Pretty accurate. Onto the Death Star. Oh yeah, and I definitely wanted to, before we move on from the 5200, show you the G-Force Plus, which is a flight yoke for the PC used with the Atari, or actually it's a PC 15 pin to Atari 5200 adapter made by Bohoki at Atari Age. All right, let's move on. And now I want to show you something that's kind of interesting. This is a Star Wars Republic Squadron Clone Wars plug and play made by Jack's Pacific. And this particular controller video game is just, you plug it directly into the TV and you get some really great analog control, shooting the enemy spacecraft. This is really very accurate. I've played this before. My brother-in-law owns this, and I've had a lot of fun playing through this game, and it's worth it. It definitely is a nice way to play, and it's very reminiscent of what we're trying to do here today on the Atari 2600 and ultimately the 5200, as well as the Gamecube, which we're going to show the N64 controller on here in a few minutes. Well, all right, we got our trusty old GameCube, and it's playing the game Star Wars Rebel Strike Rogue Squadron 3. This is actually a limited edition preview disc that I have up and running here. And as you can see, we can get Star Wars Arcade playable right on the main menu. Another way of doing this is to get Star Wars Rebel Strike Rogue Squadron 3, which is the actual game, Although you're not going to see this on the front menu, you have to enter a code. Go check down in the description and you will find a link to where that's explained. You have to enter codes. You can not only get Star Wars the arcade game playable, but you can also get The Empire Strikes Back, which is also a vector graphics game that's very similar to Star Wars arcade game. In my opinion, maybe not quite as fantastic, but still good. And then there's also a Return of the Jedi game, which is more raster graphics as opposed to vector graphics. So anyway, yeah, you can get to it, but it's a little more complicated because you got to enter codes. Anyway, we're just on the preview disc right now because it's just easy to get to. All right, so let me just show you the setup here. I've got a Game Elements PlayStation to GameCube controller adapter. It's also a little Xbox connector as well, but we got the GameCube plugged in and it's clicked on to GameCube. And then to that, we have connected a product called Game Controller Super Converter, and this is made by the company Brook. I don't know if you're seeing that too well, but yeah, this basically converts a PlayStation 3 controller or PlayStation 4 if you want it to be PS4 into PlayStation 2. So we've got that running into the Game Elements adapter. By the way, if you don't have a Game Elements adapter, they're actually pretty easy to find these days. It's one of the more common GameCube PlayStation controller adapters. There are others out there. This one's a little bit uncommon. It's called the Total Control for the GameCube, made by Innovation. And this one is, it was pretty popular back in the day, but it's becoming harder to find and it's kind of extra expensive. And this one is called the GameCube, a Cube Joy Box. Okay, so the Cube Joy Box is also one that can work, I believe. All right, so anyways, now you've got into your Brook adapter a Cronus Max Plus. Now, into that basically is PC driven. You have to connect to software, which I have in here, called the Cronus Pro version 1.20. That's the version I have, and it works fine. And if you have a later version than that, that's probably even better, but I've got 1.20. So you've plugged it in here through its program port. Into this end, you've plugged in a PS3 controller. You could have plugged in a PS4 controller, but you have to configure it in the software to either be a PS3 situation or a PS4 situation. I have configured it in the software to be a PS3 situation, okay, because this is PS4 controller compatible. So now that it's all in the computer, I can control the game with this PlayStation 3 controller. So what we're going to do is to connect an N64 controller to this, and that might actually be a good way to get this rolling. So let's concentrate on that. And what I'm going to do is I've got my N64 controller, and in it I have a product called the Tilt Pack. This is made by Pelican. I don't know if you're seeing that very well. The Tilt Pack is basically like a jump pack or rumble pack for the N64, but it's not going to do any rumbling. It's basically, well, it can rumble if you put batteries in it. And this is not going to rumble. I don't want it to. I clicked it in here, and now it's in. And on this side, I've got its special little connection adapter plugged in to something called an adaptoid. An adaptoid, this was released right around year 2000. It's one of the options to plug an N64 controller into a PC, okay? There are things besides Adaptoid that do that are newer. I'm sure those will work just fine, but mine happens to be vintage. I think it's probably the first ever N64 to PC controller adapter, or to USB controller adapter. So once you've got that in to your laptop, you want to calibrate it by going to Control Panel. I'm using Windows Vista, so I just went to Control Panel and Game Controllers, and just double check to make sure this analog stick was working well. Now, once you've got it set up with the Adaptoid into the laptop, you're going to next go to Plugins and go to X-Aim. X-Aim is a plugin for the Cronus Pro 1.20 software. So it says here you might have got to run it as an administrator. I'm going to check yes to that. And let's see here. We're going to allow administrator. We'll let this laptop figure it out here for a moment. We'll come back when it's all set. Okay, so now we have it all up on the screen. Let's take a look at this. You're going to basically go to the layout. Actually, you're going to go to File. You're going to click on New Layout, and it gives you some Xbox One and PS4 options. It doesn't say PS3, just pick PS4, new empty layout for PS4. Once you've clicked that, it's going to give you the opportunity to name it, and I named mine N64 controller. And then once you've done that, you want to go over here to direct input. And that means we're going to directly input something that's coming into the PC into the Cronus Max Plus. Now, you're going to want to click Enabled. And once you've clicked that, hopefully we'll get it rolling here. You're going to also want to go to, let's check and see if it got a check mark. Okay, now it has a check mark next to Enabled. And you go to DI Settings, Direct Input Settings. And there you can just check to see if it's up and running. Now, the reason I've got this actually working is because I went through and assigned each key that I wanted to use as a GameCube controller or PlayStation controller in the menu here. So I went to, I believe I went to, direct input, and then I assigned these keys by right-clicking on each of the PlayStation 4 controller buttons, and then it gave me a drop-down. And I called, this button 1 for a PC controller, and button 2 I think I put here, and then 3 and 4 were up here, and I also put button 1 up on the shoulder buttons, so either shoulder button can be recognized as fire. All right, so now that you have this up and running and it's enabled, it's definitely going to work. To get the tilt pack running, you press Start and both buttons, and you've got yourself the game or the controller that tilts. There you go. But it's kind of tricky. So now I'm going to play the game. And again, do you really want to play the game like this? It's not really like in the arcade. In the arcade, you were holding a flight yoke and you were doing this, okay? That's a more desirable thing to have. So that's where the app drive comes in. This is made by, I think, Appfinity, and Appfinity. And the app drive steering wheel basically it's designed for phone use. It's old school, I mentioned it before. And, it says for use with Android and Apple. I think there might have been a game, 2XMX Off-Road. It's a free download, but, one game made for one of the old version iPhones and old version Androids. I don't think too many people played it, and there might have only been 1 or 2 other games that worked with this, so it kind of faded into obscurity. But if you remove the part that's where your phone gets clicked in, you actually want to saw at it a little bit. I'm showing you some footage of the sawing of that. Then you can fit your N64 controller into the app drive. And once you've got it placed in there, you're going to want to use either rubber bands. I used little elastic ties, hair ties or whatever, to get it bound into there so it wouldn't move too much at all. Actually, it's a pretty nice snug fit once it's in there. So yeah, let's go ahead and I'll cut away here and we'll show a little bit of footage of the gameplay with the Appfinity rearing and ready to go. All right, so yeah, we got it all set up now, and the tilt feature is fully intact and raring and ready to go. You can go over here to wave 1, or we can do wave 3. A little harder. Let's see what we can do with that wave. Looks like I'm going to need a little bit more practice. But you can see I'm doing this and we're getting that arcade type control. And there is a way to mount this also, even wirelessly, into one of these Appfinity app drive wheels. And we'll be showing that in our upcoming sequel episode to this. Another thing I will mention to you is that if you have a controller that is, let's say I was showing this earlier in the episode, that's controlling like this with its tilt feature, that's just not the ideal. Putting this into the Appfinity actually allows you to have handles that work like the arcade. Now there are some controllers for the PlayStation 2, the FPS Master, and when you plug a special adapter called the Splitfish Motion FX adapter, which is a motion adapter for the PlayStation 2 controllers. By the way, if you click this onto a PlayStation 2 original Sony controller, there's a little plastic connector for that, but it won't connect to this, so I just rubber banded it to this first-person shooter master, FPS master, and I connected it all up to the Motion FX adapter. When you plug this in to the Game Elements PlayStation to GameCube adapter, you're actually able to play this game very effectively, and you can program, instead of the button to be on X, you can actually program the button to be on trigger inside the controller itself, and it works very effectively. So that's another thought. You might want to try this. It's a good way to play this game. Okay, so yeah, let's just go ahead and give you a little bit of a taste of playing the game like this. We'll unhook this Cronus system up and just plug in the PlayStation situation and turn on the, and that's going to be working well. Okay, let's hit it. Turn it up a little bit. All right. So that's our episode for today. I definitely have enjoyed presenting this to you. A great new discovery. There's going to be more discoveries in the future. Do make sure you subscribe to my channel and definitely give us a like, and comments are much appreciated. I look forward to showing you a sequel to this. Our next episode will show you a couple of the details about how to set up these controllers and play Star Wars. So, all right, we'll see you soon. It's good seeing you. Take care.